So my first guest I'd like to bring in is a retired lieutenant colonel, a US Marine, and his name is Chris Lozano. So without further ado, here he is. Hey, Chris. Good morning to you. Good evening, my end. So thank you for being up, as many of our US guests are, early in the morning, but it's something that you do regularly. You tell me you're normally into your second coffee by this time. Is that your second one?
It is.
So what's the deal with getting up so early in the morning? Is that out of habit, having spent 26 years in the military?
Yes, in large part I think so. I think I'm just wired to naturally enjoy the solitude of the morning, and it gives me a chance just to kind of get set and have some alone time and some thinking time, and certainly a lot of years of habit of getting very little sleep and being used to functioning that way. But I was, even in war, I was always one of the first ones up, and always one of the last ones to go to bed. I just don't enjoy sleeping.
So let's talk about your journey. And we've got about half an hour, and I know that it's a full journey, and there is an episode of Know Their Story, which is a podcast that you were on. And if people want to go and listen to that podcast, it'll give them a lot more background into your military experience. But do you want to just talk about that journey and how you got into the military, how you did multiple tours of duty to Iraq and Afghanistan, and just tie up that experience coming back so we can get into the music and things that you do now?
You bet. I joined the Marine Corps in 1981. I was just a typical young man who was lost and just was spending too much time not doing useful things. My father died, and I didn't really have any direction. So I had met a young man who had impressed me in his bearing and in his his accomplishments already. He was a 23, 24 Vietnam veteran at the time, and I just said, I want whatever he has. So I joined, and it changed my life. But it really met up with the thing that I've always spent my life doing, which is pursuing excellence. And I went and did that, and then I wanted to become an officer, so I became an officer. I wanted to become a lawyer, so I became a lawyer. And I continued on both my military career with periods of active duty. I spent a fair amount of time in the Marine Corps Reserve, which is our reserve force in the Marine Corps, and then was just kind of moving along in life, not doing anything super exciting. And then 9/11 happened, and when 9/11 happened, that was a Tuesday, and I just knew that I was going to be needed. I mean, it's one of those things you don't need to even ask the question. And so, being in the military is a lot like being on the bench waiting to get put in the game. And you know that you don't know when you're going in, but when you get called and coach says, go in, you got to be ready. So I came home on 9/11 and I packed my sea bags and put them by the door. And I got a call that day, and was on my way and was gone for almost 2.5 years that time. And during that time, I went to first Afghanistan in 2002, and then Iraq 2003, actually Kuwait, then for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And then went back in Iraq in 2006 and 7 in Anbar province. And, I kind of went from private, and I just found myself eventually lieutenant colonel. And it was just one of those things that never ceased to amaze me, but it also really, I think, bears witness to the power of meritocracy, that you achieve what you aspire to. And if you don't aspire to it, and if you don't set out as goals, you're never going to make it. So that was what took me there.
So I heard in your story that you were lost at a young age, that you weren't on the straight and narrow, and you more or less had to give yourself some accountability. And if I understand correctly, your father had passed while you were younger. Is that correct?
That's correct. My father died. I was 19, and I had always been fascinated with the military. I had grown up watching the Vietnam War unfold. I was born in 1960, so I was a young lad watching the war on TV, and my dad worked in defense, designing fighter aircraft for McDonnell Aircraft. And I wanted to join. I wanted to be a Marine as a young boy. My dad said, "No, you're going to college." And so I did. And then when he died, I just became rudderless and drinking and carousing and doing the things that the young men do. And I had that moment where I was pretty pathetic. And I just said, you got to do something. You got to do something to bring yourself straight. And I knew the Marines would do that. And so I essentially gave myself no choice. I signed up. I literally signed up, the morning after I made the decision, and was gone, and then it led me down that path. Never regretted it.
So as a young man entering the military, and then now 26 years, you were 26 years in the military. So it's not 26 years on. I believe you're 26 years in the military. So correct that. But so it's tough when guys do any tour of duty, and you have seen a lot and done a lot that makes you a changed man. So do you want to speak to, firstly, what does the military teach you as a man? Like, what do you miss being retired now? What do you miss about being part of the military, despite the things that go on in the military that you're asked to do, and that you have to defend against?
Well, that's a great question. I would say I miss it every day. And I miss it first and foremost for being surrounded by people with common purpose. And that common purpose of getting up knowing that we had a singular mission, that we all were driven by the same thing, is tremendously powerful, because that helps make you give your best all the time. And so, being surrounded by people driven to excellence, where that is the norm. It's not even noteworthy to be excellent. It's just expected. That's the average. And so then to even be noteworthy above that is an extraordinary accomplishment. But more importantly, it makes pursuit of that not about yourself. It makes it about the betterment of the good for everyone. And I really appreciated the selflessness of the military life. I love the hardship. I love getting up and facing hardship. I loved waking up, sleeping on rocks, and drinking cold coffee, and being hungry and being fatigued, and bearing through it. It harkened right back to my early days of sports as a young man. And that was really the thing that felt so familiar to me when I started.
I was going to ask you around the parallel between sport, what you're describing there. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's on the extreme, and you're giving service to your country, mm-hmm. Which you can't compare sport and the two. Like, you can't really compare the two in that regard. But some of the traits that you talk about now, you told me at the head of the program, I knew you were doing baseball, but you actually got a role as a college baseball coach. So how important is that to you? Like, having now, it's because it depends on how you approach it, but to some extent you can treat the regimen the same as the military when you've got a team to work with.
Oh, absolutely. So the parallel for me is, first and foremost, the disciplined approach to getting better, to be, I call it demand excellence. I tell my players, demand excellence in everything that you do, everything. If you are walking from point A to point B, you're wrong. You could be running. That's an extra lap. That's a little bit of extra conditioning. So my players run wherever they go. Don't waste a moment to get better, I tell them. If you're in the cage of swinging a bat, you better be doing it right. You better be using it with purpose. And so for me, those are the common things. But, I got into coaching baseball, of course, as a player, and then first as a father, as a coach. And I kept in it because I just could see that people are missing that the idea that they can be using common things like getting up in the morning to become better. And how do you further yourself? You have to have purpose in your life. And I love seeing the impact that I have on young baseball players. And I coached high school for many years, and now I'm coaching college baseball. And just to see them in the early stages of learning and how you can impact them. And then years later, when they call you and they're now fathers and coaches and themselves, and they reflect back on what they learned and they say, thank you. And I learned something. And it's the same. I got the same thing as a Marine when a young man would say, you drove me to be a better leader. And it's not for the recognition. It's for the sense of accomplishment of a purpose. I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah. So something that you and I have similar in common is I work with young people as well with basketball, and it is a motivating factor. I've been doing what I do for 30 years, and it is my business now. So basketball's what I do. So I absolutely love it, and I'm married to it. But so I understand what you're saying. It absolutely resonates with me. The impact that you can have on a young person's life, and obviously your life experience, as I have had life experience as a man, you feel a responsibility or an empowerment to actually impart some of your life lessons onto the youth, so that they can avoid some of the mistakes that you may well have made or make to this day. But look, I want to move the conversation along a little bit. Baseball, I could talk sport all day, and I don't want to go there because it's just a passion, like for me. But I want to talk about a passion that you've fallen into. Not so much fallen into. You took up music at a young age. I want to talk about your first guitar, where you got your first guitar, and how you had this big gap where you didn't pick up a guitar, and then what led you to pick it up again, and now to pursue music, even though it is a profession to a degree, because you are playing on stages in clubs. I want to talk about what got you back into it, and why it's so important to your life now.
I think if I really thought about it, it's because I've always been wired differently, and it always felt like there was more inside me than I could verbalize, and it would just resonate in my head, and it would just usually come out in unproductive ways. So when I was 8, my parents bought me really just one of those cheap guitars I got at the department store, and I just started playing with it, and it was just something that connected in my head to my fingers, and I just loved it, and I taught myself how to play. I took some lessons early, but didn't really stick with me very well. And then I was about 12, and I realized that that was a way to impress the young ladies that were now suddenly present in my eyes. I began earnestly to learn the guitar and learn the craft of guitar, and I just found myself to be pretty decent at it. I began songwriting, and I really wanted to pursue music as a career. That wasn't part of my brain, and then the other side of my brain was wanting to do something physical, which was, by the way, another way to express myself. And so I joined the Marines, and I always had my guitars and other instruments, but it became hard to bring them along. And then I got married, became a young father, and they just became less prevalent in my life, became less important. And then pretty soon years would go by, and I would not see them or use them, and they gathered dust. And every now and then I would reminisce about my club days as a young man, but I really never did anything with it. And so to kind of tie the story together is I have a large family. I have 7 kids, and my oldest son David, who was just such a wonderful, happy young man, died in 2009 of a pulmonary embolism. He died very suddenly, and certainly we weren't prepared or expecting it. And that loss, combined with my wartime experiences and kind of the impact that had on my life, really drove me into another thing that I had dealt with most of my life, which was depression. And I like to tell people that while war doesn't damage everybody, war changes everybody. And, when you come with what you come into, you leave with it. And so if you come in and you have depression in your life, well, then it's now compounded by your experiences. And so, you add all those things together, I really spun into a very deep depression. And I tried medication, I tried therapy, and they were having some impact. But then one day a musician friend of mine called, and he could see it. He could see that I was in pain. He could see that I was struggling. And he just said, "Hey, brother, pick up your guitar, please." And, he was quite worried for me, as it turns out. And I did. And it was like opening a window into my soul. It just allowed all of that to kind of reconnect. And I just started pouring my heart into my music. And whether anybody hears me play or not really is, not the important thing. It's that it's just kind of a way for me to connect the missing parts in my brain with my soul. And so that's how I started playing again.
It's one of those things I find, as I mentioned at the top of the show prior to us going live, that I speak with a lot of people about their passion, and a lot of people fall into their passion or are looking for purpose. Some are looking for a form of escapism, and there's a lot of people I've spoken to who have faced adversity in their life, and they gravitate to things they may have done as a child to not, it may answer one of those questions, to give them purpose, a sense of fulfillment. But for you, this has been an out for you because it's a way in which you can actually speak to some of the things that you've experienced in your life through the writing of the lyrics. So you have some very powerful lyrics to some of your songs. Do you want to describe some of the words in your songs and why they're significant? There's probably a lot that's packed into that question, but can you give us some examples and elaborate on why they are significant to your story?
Yeah. Wow. Where do I start with that question? I will say the response I've gotten from especially combat veterans is you're saying things that I never thought I'd hear, which are things that are important to me. You describe things that I've seen and felt, and you're giving words to my experience. And that comes not only with a lot of gratitude for that statement for me, but a lot of responsibility. And I think the one lyric that comes to mind is in a song I wrote called "The Long Way Home," that's going to be in a documentary about combat veterans. And it says, "When I close my eyes, I go to war. I battle. The angels battle for my soul with the enemy and the booze." And I had to think about that one, but it just talks about the turmoil that can go on, and that turmoil can come from a lot of things. It's not just about the things you see or do. It's about the things you miss. For me, a big part of my regret was just being gone for so long and missing out on so much of my kids' lives, and then my son dying, and my responsibility in that, was very heavy. So the words are a way to frame emotion that are hard to describe for people, and then it allows them to connect however that experience connects them to it. I also try to write lyrics that aren't quite so literal for everybody. It's easy to make literal statements, but I like to try to write words that can be more universal in their meaning. That way people can kind of line things up with their own experience.
So I'm not sure if you finished the statement there, but
if you let me talk, I'll just keep talking.
No, you're right, mate. I listened, as I said, and if people want to go check it out, the Know Their Story is a good podcast that you shared with me so I could get a bit of background for you. And there's a lot of insight into veterans in there, and I didn't want to unpack that so much tonight because there is a podcast there that speaks to that, and I wanted to speak to your music, which that one touched on, but didn't necessarily get the opportunity to elaborate with. So obviously COVID played a hand in what you can do in the music scene, but you've obviously played for veterans events. I saw photos up of you playing for veterans events. So obviously a very connected audience there, given your experience as a lieutenant colonel. And you've had tours. I'll come back to this so people get a bit of understanding of the background behind some of your music, that you walk the walk. And I would say talk now you're singing the song based on reality for you. And that's why it resonates, because I talk about common human experience a lot on my show. And I think people often feel that their experience is their own, not realizing that when you talk to other people, that other people have actually gone through a lot of the same stuff that you've gone through. So when you have the power to present those stories through music and it resonates with others, it makes people feel that they're not alone in this common human experience. So let's come back to just a little bit of Afghanistan and also, Iraq, if you want to talk about that. But and talk to a couple of the experiences that actually shaped you, particularly when you were leaving Afghanistan and your last flight out, because that's a pretty harrowing story if you want to go into that.
Well, that was actually, if you're talking about that story, that one's Iraq. So I'm going to tell you a story I didn't tell on the other podcast. And I also write. I wrote an article on LinkedIn called "When the Minefield is Real." So I was a combat engineer, and I did, as part of my duties as a combat engineer, I was responsible for mine clearance in Afghanistan, again in Iraq. And we were mapping a minefield in Bagram, which is, north of Kabul. And I had a small team, and we were surveying, right? And I mean, you have to go out. I mean, you have to understand where the minefield's at if you're going to mark it, and if you're going to then possibly clear it. But you don't do it recklessly. It's a very purposeful, kind of methodical thing. So we left a hard packed road, and I had a guide with me, and I asked him, this used to be Soviet base. I said, "Are there mines here?" And he shook his head. He goes, "Oh, no mines here." I said, "Okay, I got to take his word. He's my guide." So we're walking single file, and we're walking to another road that we're trying to get to begin marking. And I was in the front, and then literally I looked up and I see a white triangle, right? And it says mines on it. Right? To anybody, you're going to say, okay, great. You're about to walk into a minefield. To a military guy, I'm already in a minefield, because red is for the person looking in, white is for the person inside it. That's how you know you're inside the minefield. So I said, "Oh, poop." And I just remember my blood just ice cold. And then I got really focused, and I remember I squatted down in my spot, and I just sat there. I had everybody freeze, and I just sat there, and I just said, "Now what? What do you do?" All right. And we were about 50 yards into this minefield, and I just had everybody turn around. Low probability would say go back in the same places that you were just at. So we literally turned around and walked back in our footsteps. And then we finally, made it back. And I won't tell you what I said to my guide. I'll only tell you that he became very clear to him that he had messed up. And, and then we all had a good laugh. And that literal walking into a minefield became a very strong way for me to connect other experience about the unexpected and how do you respond to that. sometimes minefield's real, but sometimes it's figurative, and we all have the same moment where we have to think, now what? And so I held on to that one for a long time. But the one I wrote about that, and I like to think, there's a point where every song becomes the most important song I wrote to me for some reason. But there's, a song I wrote called "I Dodged a Bullet," and we hear that phrase a lot, in life. I dodged a bullet. Well, when you've literally dodged a bullet, it changes, how you think about things, and sometimes you don't dodge the bullet. All right, so there's a level of lack of control over those things that you have, and a lot of times the randomness of your choices play into that. So I was leaving Iraq in 2003, and my departure was rather sudden and unplanned. I was just told that I was leaving on the advance party, heading back to Camp Pendleton, and it had to do with the pending birth of my youngest son, which I was grateful for, but certainly hadn't planned. But then they gave me no way out. They didn't tell me how I was getting back to Kuwait, and they just told me to figure it out, which is a very Marine thing to do. And I'm like, all right, I got to move 600 kilometers on my own, cross, a combat zone and make it to Kuwait so I can catch an airplane. Right on. So I had two choices. I had a helicopter that I could catch, and I had a ground convoy that I could take. And the decision came down to this. I don't like helicopters. All right, I've flown on many of them. The Marine Corps helicopters are old and smoky and leak, and they're just not fun to fly in if you're not a pilot. And and also I didn't want an abrupt departure. It was already going to be abrupt enough, and I thought that day and a half, 2-day journey on the ground would give me a chance to just kind of let the moment wash over me and give me an end to the story. And so I did, and I made it back eventually to Kuwait, and then from Kuwait back to the States, and actually made it home in time for the birth of my son. And it was just a day later, maybe, that while perusing through the news, I saw an article that helicopter that I'd almost taken crashed and killed everybody.
So literally dodged.
Yeah.
So and there were no survivors in that crash. So you could have, it was a life choice, literally. You could have gone either way. If you'd have made the choice to be on the helicopter that day, I won't say may not have seen the birth of your youngest. You would not have seen the birth of your youngest, and he would not have a father.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I named the show, this episode today, Navigate Life, inspired by your story of the minefield, and that life is a minefield. It's chaotic and no one knows the future. We plan for the future. Interestingly, we think there's a degree of control there, but we don't know if there will be tomorrow for any of us.
And pandemic, how could we plan effectively for what that's done to our world?
So absolutely. Look, I know you and I, and maybe down the track we will connect again. I would love to get more of your story. I hope there's a book in the pipeline. I'm sure people have asked you for a book. I don't know how good your writing is. Yeah, I know it's good for some writing. So, but I don't know whether you've thought about a book at all. But I'm sure if not you're going to be part of, or your music's going to be part of a documentary for veterans. So I'm sure there's a lot of veterans that would be looking to tell or share their story, to humanize their experience too, because I think there's a lot of detachment that everyday people really don't understand what it means to serve in those environments. And I think just to finish it, you sort of talk about in a recent podcast I listened to that people don't, that you don't see yourself, even though you served as a hero, that you see that as your civil duty, and that for you that is one of the highest callings you can have, but it's also a calling that there's firefighters and nurses and doctors, and you see yourself just as part of a big contingent of people that are doing the best to help protect their country.
Well, I do truly believe that, and I appreciate when people say things, they value what I've done or they call it heroic. I don't view what I do heroic at all. I consider it civic duty. But I'm glad to have done it, right? When you're serving in combat, I'm glad that I was there to do that, not somebody else in my community, right? Some people are just wired differently. Okay, just like in sports, to stand out there and put yourself out on the line physically and emotionally and to give your best is not for everybody, and it shouldn't be for everybody. It should be for the people that aspire to that. And I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad there are people just like there are police officers and nurses and all those who are called to those things. I think that's important, is you find that thing, and that our world functions when we have people that can operate in a selfless environment and do it for the betterment of others, not just for the betterment of themselves. And in doing so, they become better.
That's absolutely true. And I do struggle to understand how people do get lost and don't find purpose in their life, but I don't understand that. I think it's important, and sport teaches that. But I certainly think that everything you've shared today highlights, the significance of navigating life, and it shows how all your choices and decisions, can lead you on certain paths that you may not know. And now you're back in music. Yeah. So, and you also are doing, from what I understand, you're still doing your criminal defense attorney stuff as well, and you've done some consultancy as well, around military stuff and things like that.
Yeah, well, I don't want to be bored. I want to finish the race strong. I don't want to lay on my deathbed or to die having any regrets that I could have done more. I could have done the one thing that would have made a difference in somebody's life that I didn't. And so every day I get up thinking about, what can I do today to better myself and to better the lives of others? I mean, it's a mantra I get up with every morning.
I hope you liked this episode. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and feel free to comment. If you haven't yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be advised of new interviews when they're uploaded. I hope you join us again sometime. Catch you later.